All right, welcome everyone to the How-To Room. Room 3, officially the best room at Comic-Con. Congratulations, you have found it. And it's not just because I help run this room or that I'm on this next panel, surprisingly enough. So welcome, we are so glad you were here. Just curious, how many of you, this is your very first time at Comic-Con? Welcome, thank you so much for joining our nerd family. We are glad to have you here. So we're gonna do a little housekeeping before we get into the panel. If you do need to leave this room at any time, back there, that's the exit. Please don't try to go out this way. The fire marshal gets mad at us. However, our gift to you, and if you were here before, you hear the spiel again, but if you weren't, the cleanest, most well-kept bathrooms in all of Comic-Con are right back there. Shh, keep it safe, keep it secret, don't tell anyone. It's just for people who come in here into this room, but that's a wonderful thing. Also, if you do need to get up and leave during the panel for mental health reasons, because we're going to be dipping into some heavy topics, please take care of yourselves. It's a beautiful view out there on the patio with a wonderful breeze this time of day. There are lots of different ways to practice self-care. We're going to be talking about some of them, but we want to encourage that. And there are many people here who would be happy to come alongside you if you don't just need to take a mental few-minute break yourself. With that, I am going to turn it over to Jill here, and we are off to the races. So thank you for joining us, and here we go.
I like to walk and talk because I'm pretty tall. It's my Amazonian nature. Welcome to Superhero Grief, the Transformative Power of Loss. I'm Dr. Jill Harrington. I'm here with my esteemed thanatology professionals to talk about how superheroes can help us cope with grief. This has been my passion for a pretty long time. And what an honor to be here at Comic-Con. I was a little nervous about doing this panel, and I'm sitting here in cosplay, but I'm among my people, so why should I be that nervous? Right?
Yay.
So before we begin today, I want to turn my the presentation over to Dr. Tashel Bordere, who's going to talk a little bit about us about self-care and also about honoring our heroes.
All right, welcome, y'all. So glad for you all to be here today and know talking about grief and loss in the broader culture. Never mind that Comic-Con is probably not common. And so one thing that we like to not take for granted is just the notion that we know that in any room we enter, there are people who have dealt with some type of loss, death or non-death. Show of hands. Right? And since you all relate so well, we want to also take care of you today and then also honor Mr. Kim. And so in any case, I would like for you all to imagine, to think about a loss that was significant for you and how that may or may not tie into the characters you value, right? Whether it's Wonder Woman or Superman or how they dealt and coped with various losses. So I'll give you just a moment to just find yourselves in this room again. Also, we would like to honor Dr. Howard Werniger, who contributed to the book, is no longer physically with us, but he is definitely with us today at this panel. We wanted to make sure we include death ends a life, not a relationship, right? Also, we also take nothing for granted as a professor, and for all of us, there's so many myths and incorrect information about grief and loss, so we just want to make sure we're all on the same page. Is that cool? So loss, one thing that's really important about loss is to know that loss can be a death or non-death loss, and oftentimes we have both in the same scenario, right? Why do people grieve so long? It's because there's so many losses that go beyond the death that require us to try to integrate and cope, right? Move forward in life. Grief is a normal reaction. Can we say that real quick? Grief is normal?
Grief is normal.
Well, I didn't hear y'all.
Grief is normal.
Yes, it's a normal reaction to a loss you view as significant, whether it's a human loss or your computer just crashed on you. They're not the same. The deal is with grief, there are no two losses are the same, and no two people will grieve the same loss similarly. So just your rights, just in terms of your rights of loss, mourning is just the public display, the rituals that you all engage in. Like today, you're dressed in characters, not because of a loss, but it's a ritual you engage in at Comic-Con. This is my first Comic-Con. I'm blown away by y'all, right? But it's a ritual, right? And so mourning, there are rituals that we engage in. There was a beautiful memorial, by the way, for those of you here before, right? Beautiful memorial, a place to ritualize and acknowledge life and death of Mr. Kim. Bereavement is just a period. Is the period following the death loss that we've experienced. So, okay, now we have some incredible colleagues.
And what did honestly, the superhero universe do in 2021 when we were all kind of locked down and everybody was watching WandaVision, which took a deep dive into grief? What did, Wanda actually and Vision teach us that, because there's lessons, and we're going to talk a little bit about this, is that what Dr. Kathy Shear says at the Center for Complicated Grief in Manhattan, New York, is that what is grief if not love persevering? So grief is a form of love, and in this memorial that I heard before coming here right now was the love that all of those who Kim really made an impression upon, an everlasting love. And that's really what our life is about love. We don't grieve what we're not attached to, and we don't love, and who doesn't have meaning to us. And his meaning in the world meant something to all those he left an impression upon. And so I just want to honor that by saying that grief, what is grief but if love not persevering? Yes, right?
Drop the mic. All right. So because we want to say so much, get so much in and have time with you all, we know this is such a rare space. We're going to try to not speak like auctioneers, but we just have this urgency to know we have this rare opportunity and we want to just take advantage of it. So, yes.
With that said, I want everyone to briefly introduce themselves because you know who I am, right?
Yes. Should I? Well, I'll just go since I was. We'll be done with me. Well, okay. So I'm Tashel Bordere, Vice President of the National Alliance for Children's Grief, professor or anyway, a lot of different things. My specialty area is social justice issues and loss and grief, looking a lot at grief of marginalized populations, and Black bereavement is my specialty area. So nice to meet y'all.
I'm Heather Stang. I'm a thanatologist and a certified yoga therapist and the founder of the Mindfulness and Grief Institute. And my passion is to teach people coping skills and self-care strategies for grief and beyond. And everything I do is rooted in my own history of loss and wishing my family could have had these strategies back in the 70s.
My name's Brendan Prout. I have been a volunteer with Comic-Con since 1986, so I go back a minute. And I'm a nerd of many different colors. I'm obviously involved in cosplay, many of the Star Wars groups like the 501st, Rebel Legion. I'm a droid builder. On the real world side of things, I have been an educator and a counselor for a couple of decades. I'm a pastor, and I work Monday through Friday for the Navy as a work and family life consultant for Fleet and Family Support Center.
I'm Lindsey Fenton. I'm a filmmaker and producer-director. I work for a PBS NPR affiliate in Pennsylvania. I'm the producer and director of a multi-platform project called Speaking Grief that's produced by WPSU, my employer, and funded by the New York Life Foundation that is focused on normalizing and validating grief, getting it out there on a big spectrum, and also helping people become more comfortable interacting with people in their lives who may be grieving any type of loss and developing meaningful connections around that. And it's also my first time at Comic-Con, so I'm really excited to be here.
Lieutenant Colonel David F. Carey. I'm retired. 23 years in the Army with 2 tours in Iraq, a tour in Afghanistan, a tour in Africa, and a tour in Northern Macedonia. My chapter in the book focused on grief leadership through the life and times of Captain America. So we're here to kind of provide both the grief background around the movie context for that period.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point. Can we just mention also the chapter that we covered, just even the title of it, like which movie, film, or why don't we go back this way?
Okay, so I'm the only one on the panel who's not an author, but I am obsessed with the idea of superhero grief because I'm all about the power of media to build empathy and connection and help us understand our journeys on this weird place we call Earth.
Okay.
I had the opportunity to write Chapter 30, which involves Doctor Strange and how he processes through grief and spirituality. I was invited to the conversation being a pastor and working those realms. But there's a lot of crossover in here we might dive into. Many of us have volunteered with an organization called TAPS, which is the Tragedy Assistance Program for Survivors, which provides support to military affiliated people who have lost a loved one.
And your title,
Yeah, my chapter is Mindfulness as Your Grief Superpower. And I, too, focused on Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, who I feel embodies mindfulness and compassion. And in my chapter, I not only give background into what mindfulness is, but I offer a guided meditation on how to make mindfulness your grief superpower.
Yeah, isn't this fascinating? For me, the chapter that I covered was addressed Black themes of loss and bereavement in the Black Panther, and how they resonate with the Black experience in context in the broader culture. Looking at homicide loss in particular, father loss and parent loss, and coping, wealth versus not having wealth, resources versus not having resources, and how it impacts the way people cope, not just in the movie, but in real life. So with that said, all of these, there are many more exciting chapters too in the book. And I'm not a salesperson, but I have to say, if you relate to comic, you're here because you are you are fans of the many characters and films, then I think you will find it fascinating. It's an easy read as well. So like it's very, reader friendly too. She wants you to show the book. So the visionary here, and a superhero grief advocate, and believe me, when she brought this idea to the Association for Death Education and Counseling, when we both have been on the board, people were like, maybe, right? So she fought for this for you all, okay? For many people who identify with characters. So I want to say that. So I want to give her some flowers and things like that. Wonder Woman. But in any case, Jill. So
and they made me wear this today. Okay.
Yeah, we held her down and forced her.
No, good sport. So Jill. So when you thought of superhero grief and integrating this into the field, what created your vision for this book? Tell us a little bit about that. Like your thoughts, purpose.
So a little bit about the history of superhero grief. So I guess if I go back to the beginning, I'll try to, they don't let me kiss the Blarney Stone in Ireland anymore because I make a long story longer. So they're like, my cousin's like, no, you can't kiss that anymore. But
why you wanted to do this book in particular? Like, what made you do this book?
I wanted to do this book because in 2001, after 9/11, I had worked in oncology, and so the use of the superhero archetype was pretty big in illness and loss. But it was after really 9/11, working with 9/11 families, I had a young boy, and again, I grew up in Queens, New York. My mom actually worked with Bob Kane's sister, Doris, and when my sister was sick, Doris revealed her secret identity to us, and her brother made those pictures that you saw in the film. My sister almost died, and he sent these really beautiful notes out of the blue, nowhere, to my sister and to me, helping for a speedy recovery. And so I grew up, a fan of Batman. I grew up in New York, so I was like always a fan of the Batman. But Bob Kane made it even better because of his superhero, act of kindness in revealing himself to his sister, who revealed these notes to my mom, and it was just beautiful. But and I'm not going to age myself, but like I grew up in the bourgeois of superhero times. But it really was after 9/11 that I was working with Project Liberty. I was working with families on Long Island, and this young African-American boy came in. He had lost his uncle in the towers, and he was being mandated sort of into counseling. His mom was bringing him in every week, and I'm pretty good at sitting with silence, and kids test you with silence, and he just kept sitting there with silence, and it was pretty awkward for him, and I'm just sitting here, and it's my job as a therapist to create a therapeutic rapport. And I sat with him through the silence, because that's what I had to honor. But one day, I was like, how do I actually bridge like a language with this kid to like sort of connect with him? And one day he walked into my office with a Batman shirt on. And I said, oh, okay, you like the Batman? And that's when the therapeutic bridge really happened. And I said to him, Batman also lost his parents. His parents were killed. They were murdered, and just like your uncle was murdered in the trade towers. And you want to talk a little bit about that? And just that was it. That was the therapeutic bridge. So as counselors and therapists and as an educator, I teach, I'm an adjunct professor, and I also have a son on the autism spectrum, and we've had a lot of losses in our life. And he loves, because of his mom, we love Gojira and we love superheroes and we talk all this language. This was a language to me. So in 2009, at the Association for Deaf Education and Counseling, which I wound up doing a crazy thing as a social worker, going back and getting a PhD. And I was sitting there doing my dissertation research with like these researchers who do grief and bereavement. And I had like the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. And I opened up my screen and there was a fan picture of Batman standing next to the grave of his parents with flowers. And Dr. Kathy Shear said to me, and she's Google her name. She's a big center in the middle of New York. And like in my field, this is like, I'm a doctoral student. She's like, who's that? I'm like, that's Batman. And she's like, what's he doing? I'm like, well, he's a homicide survivor. Like he lost his parents. Like every single superhero. The reason why we have superheroes, honestly, is because it is their dual identity. They're all coping with the traumatic loss of a loved one in their life. What sets us on a trajectory of identity when we profoundly lose somebody? And this is the center of almost all origin stories of superheroes. And when people are killed, it also puts us on a moral trajectory. If we find new powers, or if we're imbued with powers, what do we do with these powers? Do we become a hero to ourselves? Do we become a villain to ourselves? What path do we walk? And so, without really the loss of his planet and the death of his parents, Superman in our world really wouldn't exist. Superman is really the metaphorical story of the story of Moses and the exile of the Jewish people, and comes out of the Holocaust, of those migrating here to the United States to flee safe harbors. But it wasn't safe here. There was anti-Semitism here. And most of the comic writers could not use their real names. Stan Lee was Stan Leibowitz. Bob Kane was not Bob Kane. He was Robert Kahn. So they had to hide their own identities because the comic arts were not accepted in the 40s and 50s. But also we were fighting a war, World War II, which a lot of these superhero narratives are about our own oppression, annihilation, and extinction. And so, when Nazi Germany was trying to come up with the Übermensch, Siegel and Schuster came up with their version of a Superman. Their version, which was an impassioned superhero that was fighting for really the oppressed and the marginalized, and also to help save the world. So they knew that they had to get that archetype out there in propaganda, and that's why all superheroes were banned in Nazi Germany at the time. But, you know, without Bruce Wayne's parents being killed, not that we want that to happen, we don't, but our losses then challenge our identity. How do I make meaning of this? And so, you know, Batman comes out of Bruce Wayne's negotiation, his transformative process through his loss. Who am I now? What is my identity? We certainly know with great power comes great responsibility. You know, when Peter Parker, when his Uncle Ben dies, he's been imbued with spider powers. What does he do with those powers? He could use those powers to really be destructive to himself and to others. And most superheroes' path, it's not clean. They are flawed. They have flaws. They walk that shadow path. And so grief makes us walk, in some ways, a shadow path. It's not a binary state. Sometimes we do really destructive things. Sometimes we're a Deadpool. You know, sometimes we are that anti-hero. And so, you know, superheroes, and we have Storm. You know, Storm, whose parents were killed when she was young. And she's imbued with these weather powers and other powers. And she becomes a savior to the X-Men. And what she does in her grief with her powers is she decides to help lead other mutants. She decides to become a leader. In grief leadership, she partners with Professor Xavier, and they decide to create a home for people who are feeling marginalized and isolated. And that's what grief can make you feel like. It can make you feel isolated. It can make you feel not understood. It can make you feel marginalized. And so she, with her loss, really transformed herself to become a leader of other mutants and to create a home for them and to create a welcoming space, to create that light of hope. So that's what I really wanted to do when I created this book, was I wanted to talk to people to say, hey, you know, we've been using narratives from mythology, because superheroes are what? Superheroes are modern day mythology. We've been using mythology and stories from the beginning of time to talk about things that were the hero's journey, that, you know, were about trauma and loss and other things. We've passed these stories down for centuries. I mean, one of the biggest ones is Lord of the Rings, where we look at the hero in that, and the hero really is Samwise. Samwise, who sticks by Frodo through thick and thin. And so the hero's journey, which brings us to the depths of our pain, we can also, in a way, living this duality, sometimes we have this secret identity behind a mask. We're hiding our pain. And sometimes, you know, it's not like in Batman, what Batman says, what Rachel says to Batman is, your mask is not really your mask. It's when you take your mask off, that's what you're hiding. You're not grieving your parents' death. And so superhero grief is about this. It's about, you know, two modern concepts. So I look at these films because I'm a weird kind of nerd who like is a Thanatologist. And for you who are like, what's Thanatology? No, it's not the study of Thanos, okay? But but they have Thanos and they have Doomsday and they have, because they represent death. Thanatology, Thanatos in Greek means death. So the study of death and dying is what we represent. So when I watch these movies and I see things like continuing bonds, I see things like meaning making, I see things like transformative grief. This is what Captain Marvel did. She leaned not on her superpowers when she was being challenged by the AI. What did she do? Every time she fell down, she got up, she got up, she got up. She leaned on her human powers and she pushed against the AI. And when she did that, what unleashed was her superpowers. So yes, it's about transforming our pain, that pain and beauty can coexist, that whatever doesn't break us, all right, that grief is a universal moment. Our pain is a universal moment to be a lesson about what we do with this pain. And we see that in one of my favorite, I'm telling you, one of my very favorite grief movies, and all of them is Deadpool 2, so go watch that. But it also teaches us about a concept called post-traumatic growth. This is what we talk about in the psychology world. Post-traumatic growth is an experience of positive change, and I want everyone to think about this. I want you to think about it. It's not really, we would never want something bad to happen to us, but in that process of something bad happening to us, it's the struggle with trying to survive it that teaches us something about ourselves. It teaches us, maybe we have a deeper appreciation of life. Maybe we find strength we never had. Maybe we have a deeper spiritual connection. Maybe we have deeper purpose in life. And these are what Tedeschi and Calhoun have studied through the course of human, and we see this in all the written literature through the course of history, is that, adversity can also help us grow. It's not that we want the adversity to happen, it's the struggle to survive. And to do our heroes, what do they do? Because they actually sometimes, I remember that scene in Batman Begins where he's thinking about killing the person who killed his parents, right? Yes. So we kind of sometimes struggle with that. And so we're also here, so part of this book is also everybody here has probably heard about the 5 stages of grief. You walk out of this room here today, I want you to take the 5 stages of grief and say, the world is flat, that's old theory, it doesn't exist anymore. There's no linear process through grief, but the media loves it. So I'd like to ask all of you, one of our mission is to create a more grief-informed world. And that's kind of why I went out there and I put myself on this edge in front of all my professional peers and I said, I want you to look at superhero movies because nobody on this panel right here except for Brendan and David and Tashel, I love, actually even watch superhero stuff. I said, I want you to watch it through the lens of loss.
Yes.
And come up with what you said. But now, if you had a myth of grief that you want to dispel, because this is our mission, to dispel this, what would you say is the myth of grief you would like to dispel right now?
And super quickly, because we're at the 5:29 mark. So I'm actually going to yield to some of my colleagues real quick. Just
The one that I like to dispel is time heals all wounds. Our colleague, Dr. Robert Niemeyer, did some research. I'll keep it quick, but basically he found that time accounts for 1%. That's it. It's what you do with the time that matters, and that's what I like to teach people, is how to use your time in a way that helps you be your own superhero, that helps you learn how to nurture yourself through the grief process, to build connections with other people, and to find meaning.
yes.
I
And similarly, we're going to try our best to stick with about a minute or 30 seconds. That was perfect, Heather. So that because we also have more questions, and so we want to make sure we get to everybody. All right.
I was just going to say, our old friend Darcy Sims used to say, all time does is pass. Time doesn't heal. I like to dispel the myth that grief has a well-defined path and rules. It does not. Our journey towards healing cannot be expected to follow a clearly defined path that looks like everybody else's. Our journey is our own unique journey, and it needs to be allowed to be that.
Thank you.
I would like to dispel that grief is synonymous with sadness or depression. Grief is not one feeling, it is all the feelings, so pretty much any emotion you can name on the human spectrum has a place in grief if that's part of your journey. It's sometimes multiple feelings at once. So I think, going with the idea that we contain multitudes and that grief is messy and confusing and can be so many things simultaneously.
And I would just like to say it's okay to take 2 steps back to go 1 step forward. So if you've had to get through critical tasks, you've had to get through a deployment and you get done with it, it's okay to take 2 steps back after those things are complete to take 1 step forward.
And I would say just because we don't understand another person's grief does not mean that their grief is invalid or should be devalued. Mm-hmm. And you're right, your rights to grieve matter. Grief bursts will happen in different spaces, be it Walmart or Target or I don't know what's even in San Diego. But you're in a store and you smell somebody's cologne and you're not crazy and you smell it and you have tears coming down your eyes. Yeah, that's normal. So many weird things are normal in grief. So So we're going to start talking each about, really quickly, a little bit of pearls of wisdom from each of the chapters. So I approached Lindsey because she has an amazing, I just want to put a shout out to Speaking Grief, yes. One of the best documentary films. I use it in my class. I'm an adjunct professor. If you really want to know about grief, Lindsey did a phenomenal job about trying to normalize grief in society more. It's a wonderful documentary film. So please, but Lindsey is really about the power of media and film. I'd like to start with Brendan. I approached you about writing a chapter on Dr. Strange and spiritual growth after loss. Can you maybe share with us a few
things about the chapter and your experience with the chapter and what you'd like to impart upon the audience today?
Gosh, encapsulating it would be really difficult. I was challenged because when I think of grief and loss, my go-to is Batman. And when you said, yeah, I'd like you to do one on Doctor Strange, I'm like, I like Doctor Strange. I'm going to have to lean into this a bit. But the more I looked at his journey, the more I saw various levels and elements of grief and how his very character was transformed through the way that he processed and through the way that he engaged with others, speaking into what was not particularly healthy in his life. So a lot of us like to think that we're doing all right, but I like to say that we can all be doing a little bit better, and a wise person is one who listens to the wisdom and insight of others and becomes even wiser. So as we grow, there's kind of a universal constant. Healthy things grow and growing things change. Our grief journey will change us.
And Brendan, what did you think? Because like when in 2018 at the Association for Death Education and Counseling, I did this panel on Batman, and everybody thought it was going to be like this really silly thing, and all my academics in the field, that's when Routledge approached me and said, would you like to do a book on this? So I was like, sure, I could talk about Batman all day. They're like, no, a whole superhero thing. And I was like, oh, really? What did you think when I was like, hey, we're going to talk about superheroes and grief? What was your first reaction?
It's about time.
And so same thing with each panelist, and I'm super conscious of time because this is such good stuff. It's 5:33, so in the next 7 minutes, and I'm not actually great with time, by the way, yeah, I'm always late, but you know what I mean, I'm on my time. So yes, we could do this because for our folks, 5:33. Who would like to go? Well, who's next? All right, thank you, Heather.
Yeah, so I mentioned mindfulness is your grief superpower. There's a lot in that, but one of the things people don't realize is much like those radioactive spiders changed Peter Parker into Spider-Man, practices like meditation and yoga, and by the way, meditation is very similar to the word exercise. There's 50 billion different ways you can do it, and some are going to be right for some people, and different things work at different times, but that these practices actually change your physiology. Like, you're actually becoming more of a super person in your neurology, in your immunology, in your ability to handle difficult emotions. And so I want us to all realize we have the power to do something about our grief reactions. And just very quickly, grief is not just an emotional heart thing, it is also a biological thing. And there's a lot of wonderful research coming out on the brain and grief. And one of the things that can help are these practices. So I hope you'll read my chapter and learn more about the nerdy science behind it, because it's pretty fascinating.
We can all be found too online some kind of way. That's just like...
Yeah. I'll just say, yeah, again, I didn't write a chapter, but I'm a fangirl of superhero grief because the work I do is all about normalizing grief, making it something that we're comfortable talking about. And Jill touched on earlier that grief can be very, very isolating for people because you end up feeling othered because as a culture we're so like grief avoidant. And I think using media like this opens it up and makes it less scary for people who perhaps haven't experienced loss in their life to have some sort of framework and conceptual ability to approach someone in their life who is grieving, even if it is through the lens of media. It can just open opportunities for conversation, or if you are someone who's experienced a loss, it can feel validating to see those feelings played out in this grander fashion. I was saying, I think the scale too of, in a superhero context, when we lose something or someone that's important to us, it feels like the world ends, but the irony and the cruelty is that it keeps spinning and it goes on. But I think there's a catharsis that can happen when you actually get to watch the scale of the world ending or almost ending play out in one of these films, because that's what it feels like inside your loss, even if the rest of the world isn't seeing it. So I think these are just on both sides of the spectrum. I think this framework and the work that everyone here has done opens up conversation and builds that bridge of connection that Jill had that great slide around.
And then just very quickly on the flip side of that, if you have people in your lives and you want to practice some grief leadership, looking at that through the lens of Captain America, from everything from the loss of Bucky and his moving into Bartone's leadership principles of grief leadership, to saving the unit all the way through when he first participates with group sessions under Sam, to leading his own in the last movies, to passing the torch of leadership while practicing self-care and empathy and compassion. If you view it through those things, the way he counsels Wanda during during that movie, he counsels Wanda. I just completely blanked. And all the way through to when he passes the torch and then makes the decision to practice self-care at the end of the last movie, to stay with the love of his life, Peggy, and then pass the shield on to Sam. So as you've got other people in that, to take a look through those lenses as you look at Captain America.
Yeah. Just really briefly, yeah. So in my chapter looking at Black Panther, it was called Exploring Grief, Ancestral Connection, and Duty to Carry On. Something we actually heard in Mr. just to pull this all together, in Mr. Kim's memorial service, they talked about how they're going to carry on. And also, if you heard one of the panelists, that panelist mentioned our duty to carry it on. I'm not that type of artist, I'm a writer artist, but how we might carry on his legacy and continue the work and further advance it. And so in Black Panther, part of what I wrote about was the significance of continuing bonds. Again, we come back to the death doesn't end life. It doesn't. You can always still maintain a relationship with the person, say the person's name. I don't know if any of you have had that experience, but it's still so important. You shouldn't have to feel bad about it. And so the deal was how did the characters in the Black Panther film continue that heritage, continue bonds with their cared about persons. And this was done through an ancestral connection, right? Being able to go back and through the rituals to stay connected. And that is actually a common practice in African culture of this ancestral connection. And in fact, before my daughter gets out the car for school, sometimes I'll be like, Rosa Parks is checking you out. You know what I mean? So it's like, it sounds crazy, but the bottom line is to stay connected to the people who came before you, who paved the way, and so those were some of the themes and patterns that I brought up in the book. And then also my specialty area, again, is homicide loss, sudden death loss, disenfranchising losses. In most of these films, a lot of the losses are disenfranchising, right? Any loss can be experienced as traumatic, but when a loss is sudden, you haven't had the same opportunity to say goodbye, right? You haven't had, and you also often left with a lot of unanswered questions. Like, who did this? Why would they do it? And so they create just a greater sense of wanting to be vengeful, right? To avenge the death of people who you care about. And I work with a lot of teens who deal with homicide loss, and very similarly, people, they get stigmatized as people, like, why are these kids so violent? And it's like, have you given them support? And that was the difference between the characters in the Black Panther, is one had more resources than another, although they both were black, so to speak. Does that make sense? And both were prime. One had resources for dealing and the other one didn't, and we want to look at people holistically in their experiences and not just where they are in the end, right? How many of you saw the whole trilogy? Am I saying this right? Trilogy? That might be wrong. That's from a writer. Two.
But then in Captain America before that.
So I had to, I'm not a big buff at this, but so I had to go back and watch, what did I watch before that? Civil War. Yes, she had me on point, right? All of us on point.
I gave everybody homework assignments.
Yeah, so I had to go back and watch before so that I could also understand similar types of things, so you all can see how brilliant you already are. We need more of y'all in the world, because you have to know what happened before to understand the next film, right? And that's how grief and loss is. It's like, before you can look at another person, is you want to make sure what's their history, right? Early and later experiences. So that's what we bring. So, yes.
So that was sort of my
and
job.
Scene 41 after.
That was my job. So in the book Superhero Grief, it's really about, like, there's 42 chapters in it. I kind of, like, they came to me and I came up with these 42 chapters. I watched these movies and all these things, kind of like, you know, when Iron Man is, when Friday like speaks, you know, he sees certain things that jump out at him. Everything was jumping out. And then I went to my colleagues, some of whom had superhero experience, like Brendan and David, But, you know, Heather, you just, you're little, but you really didn't watch most of the film. What was this?
Yeah, I apologize. I feel like I'm so sorry, y'all. But I'm growing. Is that okay?
Yes.
I'm gonna go see, yes. Can I say one other quick thing? Did y'all, and I want to get this correct, the next film with the Black Panther, wasn't it cool how they integrated his death into that film? I would have liked a little heads up, but the bottom line is you find yourself being in touch with your own emotions and connected to somebody you don't necessarily know, but you do because you've been watching all of those films, right? And so superhero grief is just this incredible medium. And I know that you all come here with various careers where you're able to use it for your own grief or to support others, because being mindful of how you might use this, and even with family members, we hope that you'll use this information that we're talking about. Use your superhero knowledge to see how you might help another person deal with theirs. So
Yeah, that's something we were talking about, that a goal for this panel is, many of you probably had the experience after a loss where you couldn't find somebody who understood you. You know, we often say that grief rewrites your address book. And whether you've been through it or not, hopefully now you have some ideas in how you can sit with someone or have a conversation with someone or just be in silence with someone.
Is there any closing comments from the panel before we take questions? Any comments from David? I think you.
Questions?
Yeah, let's do
Great.
questions.
Do
I
questions?
think, Brendan, we want to open it up for any questions that people.
The mic in the middle should be open, so if people want to have questions, you can go up there, so everybody hears you.
All right. Anybody have a question?
Yay.
Hi, I'm Rebecca. I've been coming to Comic-Con, I don't know, probably 15 years now. I'm local. I'm also an MSW, medical social worker in hospice for one of the biggest hospice companies. I've never heard of this the first time. So where can I find more information? So I can just kind of advocate for the families and help guide them. I took some pictures, some screenshots of Heather's information.
So I'm going to say we have a QR code that hopefully we'll put up, but if you go to superherogrief.com/comic-con, and the QR code will get you there, you'll find information on all the panelists, a link to our websites. Is that what you're asking? And of course, the book.
Something that's like quick to hand over to the patients, like to the spouses and stuff.
Oh, that's a good idea, like a one
Good
sheet
idea.
thing.
Yeah.
Even a card.
I'll put up the QR code at the end. But what was the suggestion?
The suggestion is to make a quick handout for patients and people about
The survivors
superhero
to
grief.
utilize, like, the
Yeah,
information.
I'd be up for helping you make that, Jill.
I'm really bad at marketing myself because it's really not for me. It's about sharing the information and
Right.
creating this Justice League of Grief. So thank you for the tip there. I really
Question.
appreciate it.
Yeah, superherogrief.com, right?
Yeah, superherogrief.com.
I am not that tall. I found this panel by accident because I just wanted to sit down, and here I am. But I'm so happy. I'm so happy I did, because this superhero grief is something that I have been exploring since probably I was 10 when I saw the first Superman movie with Christopher Reeve. And I don't know how far back you go in your book, in your chapters, if you're staying like mainstream, DCU and MCU.
All over the place.
Do you go back to that one? Because there's a moment, if I can just for a second, where Superman is taking his first tour around the city. Well, first of all, he lost his father, and he tells his mother all of my powers, all the things I can do, and I couldn't save him. Like that moment was so powerful. And then you see him when he's fully engulfed as Superman, and he's flying around the city, and he sees this little girl and helps her get a cat out of a tree. And she runs in and she's like, Mommy, this man flew out and saved Fluffy, whatever the cat's name was. And the next thing you hear, and it's so small and so minute, you hear the mom slap the kid. And it's in that moment you realize he still couldn't save her from what she was living.
Right.
And it's just, I saw that movie when I was a kid, and it stuck with me. And then I've just paid attention to all of this. So I'm so glad I found you guys.
No, thank you.
And your intro is amazing, but it went really fast, and I can't read that fast. So we'll be available somewhere for us to watch the video
Yeah,
again?
so I actually created the short, and Lindsay edited. She edited it down to 2 minutes. That's what I use when I go out and teach my students, but it will be on superherogrief.com. We're going to post it on.
We can tweak the timing.
But yeah, it's Superman with all his powers. It's one thing, you talk about like rebirth and timelines and changes, and we look, in Endgame when Tony Stark, when he dies, I mean, there are finite times in the universe, and Superman with all his powers, even though his name is Kal-El, El in Hebrew meaning God, he cannot bring back Krypton, and he cannot bring back his earthly parents that die. So it does teach us that, the only thing that's permanent is impermanence.
Yes.
And so these stories are about really life, but it's about also our own death. And we've been doing this since the beginning of time, the Inquisition about our human existence and our human extinction. And so we use these mythological stories to help us kind of cope.
Can I just, we were talking just this morning about Christopher Reeve and the original Superman, and when Lois dies, I love that you see Superman, this Man of Steel, openly weeping and sobbing. So I think there's also some modeling of some healthy outlets of emotion in that as well.
Hello, how are you guys?
Hi.
Good. That was not my question. I'm a clinical director of a program that specializes in substance use and mental health and giving those people a second chance. And so I just appreciate all the work you guys have done in putting into this. And if anything, COVID has highlighted, it's the need more for mental health and understanding these things. So thank you guys for putting on this panel. My question is, and maybe I'll have to read the book, so no spoilers if that's necessary, but what's one thing, and I know we're short for time, that surprised you in your required research when you were doing it, such as you loved Batman, but you did more Doctor Strange? What's one, whether they're dealing with complicated grief or they've moved into integrated grief, because we know that drama sells, so a lot of these stories, most people are losing their parents left and right in the comics. So understanding that paradigm, what would you guys say surprised you most?
Can I answer? Go ahead.
Well, for me, I dabbled in, I'd watched a handful of superhero movies, and I had that myth in my head that all superheroes were infallible. Guess what? They're people like us, even if they're not people, even if they're from another planet. So I really just absolutely love that narrative truth.
You have to know the films, and you have to be careful. Like, you have to prescribe films very diligently. I had a client who was the driver. He was a young gentleman who was the driver of a car, and he was in an accident, and his best friend was killed, and he was the driver. And I assigned him some Batman movies to watch because he was suffering from survivor's guilt. Mm-hmm. And so I was very mindful and diligent about the movies I prescribed. And I asked him just, what stands out to you when you watch these movies? And that was the therapeutic point. So it's really important to know when we talk about cinema therapy, that as therapists, we really need to know our films and be able to sort of prescribe them very diligently. It's not just really willy-nilly. You have to be skilled at this. So I think we have 1 minute.
No, we are out of time. So thank you so much for joining us. We do not have a booth here. We are going to put the QR code up on the screen here in our last few moments, and we would be very happy to meet with you out in the hallway as we have to scoot out to make room for the next panel that is coming in.
And I just want to leave. This is me at PlanetCon in Kansas City. And I had the pleasure of meeting Giancarlo Esposito. I know he plays a bad guy, but I gave him a copy of the book, and he asked me what it was about, and then I walked away, and he actually sent his staff to come get me, and he signed this for me. I told him it was about like teaching people through superhero narratives about grief and loss. He stopped, signed this for me, and he said, "Dear Dr. Jill, keep continuing to heal through film." So even though he plays a bad guy, the man is a true gentleman. So I just wanted to end with that. All right.
QR code.
Thank you,
Thank you all.
audience.
Here's the code.
There we go.
We quick get a picture of all of us in front of the
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
Can we get a quick picture?
Yep.
Somebody might just grab one.